You should be.
I'm excited. Oh, I think, is it working?
We're live on my end.
Ooh, let me mute myself.
I know, right?
Okay.
I'm gonna post about this that we're live and
Okay.
tell anyone who joins to let me know if the chat is working or not.
Okay. Oh, it looks like from my end, it's available, actually.
Okay,
Woohoo!
that is good news.
Let me see here.
I also am like I feel like you've probably heard me say this on other ones, but I really don't know too much about you and like your journey. So I'm the most excited. I don't know. It's like fun when it's someone you don't know and then you learn so much about them. So I'm like super excited to get to know you. It's
Yay!
oh yay. Okay, awesome.
I feel
And
like
people watching, which might include you and me. That's fine. Mia might be here. If Mia's here, hi Mia.
hi.
Hi.
I saw her Instagram and I was like, the infamous, this is her.
Right? She's I always tell her, I'm like, Mia, I want to be you when I grow up. And it's very funny because she's 14. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Really impressive. So
Right?
talented, so good.
So much talent. And like, I think back to like what I was doing when I was 14. And if I had an Instagram, what it would look like, and it wouldn't look anything like that. So I am like forever impressed that I'm like, wow.
Yeah, I was blown away when I saw it. I was like, okay, all right. Learn
Yeah.
some things, take some
Yep.
notes.
I know, for real. Cool. Let's jump in. Let's say hi. Wendy's here. Some other people are here. Other folks, I imagine, will trickle in as we're talking. So, hello, welcome. I am Brianna, and I am the human behind the Little Wolf Knits. If this is your first time checking us out, thanks for checking out the Self Care Collaborative. This is week 18. I almost said 17. And next week is the last week, which feels really sad. And also, I'm like, why did I do 19 weeks and not 20? Because I don't, that, whatever. But next week's the last week. And it is bittersweet that it will be ending. And I don't know, there's so much good information here. I'm excited that all of the videos are still available for folks to go back and rewatch. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I'm not caught up yet, but I go back and watch them when I get a chance. So if you're one of those people who've been with us before, thanks for coming back. If this is your first time checking us out, thanks for checking us out. There's 17 other videos for you to watch. And I'm super excited for tonight's video, interview, talk. I don't know what I call these things. I probably call it something different every single time. Oh, Mel, do you have the chat up? Mel?
Yes, hi Mel.
Cool. So I'm super excited. I guess a little housekeeping before we start. If you're watching the video, make sure if you're doing any of the challenges or homework that we talk about or doing anything self-care related, it doesn't just need to be the things we talk about. Use the hashtag self-care collaborative 2020. After next week, I'm going to be choosing our grand prize winners. Winner? I don't know. Maybe I'll pick a few, who knows. That will include a gift card to my shop and I don't know, maybe some other stuff. We'll figure it out, but it's going to be awesome. Definitely get your posts in if you've been watching along. Otherwise, I don't know. That's all I got tonight. I'm done with the housekeeping because I'm too excited. We have an incredible maker tonight. And if you heard me at the front of the video saying I actually don't know too much about Autumn and her life. And so I'm super excited for tonight and to learn a little bit more about her. I will let her introduce herself. She's an incredible maker, an incredible human. Go ahead, tell the people who you are, where they can find you, and also please tell them what you're wearing because you know how I feel about that.
Well, hi everyone. I'm Autumn. I am the designer behind Ginkgo Bee, and I guess I'm also technically a dyer, but I think my family thinks of me as like a mad scientist, and I think of myself that way too. So I'm the dyer and slash mad designer and designer. No, sorry, blue dyer slash mad scientist and designer. There we go. I'm too excited. Behind Ginkgo Bee. You can find me at gingko.be on Instagram. And I'm super duper excited. I'm wearing one of my new designs. This is the Koi tea. It's in testing right now, but I'm super excited for it to come to fruition, for it to be. And yeah, I'm so happy to be a part of this, and also really, really thankful that I'm coming in at the back end, because I feel like that gave me so much space and time to like understand myself. Everyone else's videos, it really is self-care to watch them. Everyone else's videos just like help me process through a lot of this, and now I feel like I know myself in a way I didn't know myself at the beginning, so super thankful for that.
Oh, that's nice to hear, and it's funny and reminds me of other moments in my life where like, yeah, I probably could have been reflecting or doing something, but you don't until like something's on the calendar and then there's something, I don't know, other videos for you to watch, and it's like, oh, okay, maybe I like actually should do a little bit more of this work.
Yes.
And so I'm super excited you're here. It's also funny to hear you be like, oh, I guess I'm a dyer, because I'm like, yes, you're definitely a dyer. And also mad scientist sounds much cooler. And so I think we should make the switch over and just encourage all of the fiber artists, all of the dyers to actually refer to themselves as mad scientists.
Yes, it's so much science. Like, no matter what kind of dye or fiber you're using, science everywhere.
Yep. And so I guess, along those lines, obviously you're talking about your designs, about some of the mad science stuff that you do. Tell me a little bit about how you got into the fiber world, what your journey has looked like so far.
Well, fiber arts, I think, have kind of been in my family like forever, as long as I know. So like, my granny, she sews and knits and embroiders and cross stitch and all that stuff. So she taught me how to knit when I was like 10. And like a friend of mine taught me to crochet a couple years later. So, and I learned to sew when I was 7. So I feel like fiber art has been like, oh yeah, I would like sew the most terrible little doll clothes, and I was so proud of them. I think fiber has been in my life and something I enjoyed forever, but it's never been like the main thing until recently. It's just been something that I enjoy and can be creative and challenge myself with. But recently, a couple years ago, I discovered Knitstagram. And it was like the most perfect timing, like everyone else, because like I had a personal Instagram, but I was like, this just does nothing for me anymore. Like, I only post a picture when I'm looking cute, which is like not often. And it doesn't feel like gives me any value. I just feel like I'm pretending to look cute and like go on adventures, but that's not the reality of my everyday life. And then I discovered, I think it was Larke Bagger. I'm not sure if you know who she is, but I discovered her Instagram and I was like, what is this? And then I saw her follow count and I just realized there's this whole world out there that I don't even know about. And I just had to like check it out. So I ended up making an Instagram for knitting and deleting my personal one because it just was nothing for me anymore. And it was the best thing I ever did. It was so good. And the next year after that, in 2019, I decided that maybe I wanted to do a little more with that. And I started playing around with ideas. And then in 2020, I started Ginkgo Bee.
So the inspiration or curiosity of like, oh, I wonder if there's more I could do there. Did you know what that would look like, I guess, back then or at the time? Or
no, I just knew that I wanted to like create something of value, like not necessarily like humanitarian, but just something. I just wanted to create something for other people to appreciate, you know. And so I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll try everything and see how it goes, and I'll land there. And dyeing wasn't even in my mind. At first I was like, okay, I'll make some things to sell, some items, and I'll also try writing a pattern. And so my first pattern was my beret pattern. And to this day, I have not sold a beret, which was the original thing, but I've sold lots of beret patterns, so that's nice. And I realized like it can't like market knit items to knitting people. That doesn't really work. And also I feel so much more valued having people appreciate the craft of it than I do people appreciating the finished object.
Yep.
So it shifted in that way. And so now I have been trying to work on patterns, and somewhere in there, I wanted to try natural dyeing, and that became a whole thing that I didn't expect. I never intended to sell them, but I was experimenting so much that I was like, okay, I can't do anything with all of this yarn.
That sounds familiar. Like,
yeah.
For storage, I guess I will sell this now. That's so funny. And also, it's so funny to hear, like, I've sold no physical berets, yet I've sold the pattern. And like, yes, it makes sense. And I'm so glad at that point you had decided to write the pattern, because I imagine most people would be like scared that early on. Hi, new friends are joining. To write a pattern and try and publish it. And I don't know about you, but if I had like initially started trying to sell hand knit items and I wasn't selling anything, I probably would like feel discouraged and stop. And so I'm glad that, I don't know, it sounds like the way it came together was really organic and allowed you to stick around and stay in the game, I guess. I don't know. That sounds like.
Yeah. I went into it needing it to be organic and knowing that I needed to give it my all if I wanted it to work. And that meant not getting stuck into one idea, because like there's been so many times in my life where I've like fixated on an outcome, and life happens as it does, and it just threw me for a loop, just, you know, flat on the ground. Where am I? Who am I? So then I realized, like, okay, if I'm going to make this work, I need to know myself, because I will get discouraged. And I did, but like try everything first and not quit until it's until I have no money to do it anymore.
Uh-huh. Mhm. Is Ginkgo Bee full time for you?
Yes. So I'm also a mom. So
That is full time.
yeah. So while it is like kind of balanced is a strong word. While I also mother, I do put a lot of hours into it that I would consider it definitely full time or overtime. But yeah, it's full time for me. I don't work outside of it either. So
Uh, Arguable because mothering is work and it is full time work, but I understand what you're saying. I hear that piece. I'm also like curious too. I mean, you're talking about even a few years ago, like stumbling upon Instagram at a time when it sounds like you needed it and having some experiences, life kind of throwing you for a loop. I'm curious to hear a little bit about your self care journey and like what self care means to you, I guess.
so I feel like as a concept, self-care to me just means nourishing your personhood. Like it could be your body, it could be, your emotions, your internal person, but it just means like nourishing that and
Mhm.
and maintaining it in a state where it feels whole, if that makes sense,
Yep.
like vitamins or soul food or something, keeping things running well, so you're not obviously crashing and burning. Um, but for me personally, self-care has been very I've always cared about self-care. It's always
Mhm.
been a priority for me. But recently, it has changed a lot.
Mhm.
And so that's been an adventure of figuring out how to care for myself in what I am now. And I feel like the change there, like the obvious answers and very valid answers are I became a mother, I started a business, all those things can affect your needs. But I feel like if I look deeper, like that's not really all of
Mm.
it. So, do you want me to go further? Okay.
I do. I can't speak for the people watching, but I'm sure they do too.
Okay. Well, for me, self-care was always simple before, um, like as in before the last 4 or 5 years. It's something even as a kid I cared about, and it was always taking care of my body, like inside and out, eating foods that made me feel good, and you know, pampering myself, doing my hair, getting cute and stuff. It was always that, and it made sense, and it worked, and I felt as nourished as I felt I could be.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also, when I look back now, I realized that I spent a lot of those before years in a state of grieving.
Mm.
And um, I went through a lot of like traumatic things for a lot of years. And so, like in those years, I feel like I was neck deep in grief. And when you're neck deep in grief, the only part that you can really care for fully is your head. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was always simple. I knew how to take care of the part of myself that wasn't saturated with grief.
Mm.
And what sort of happened was over time and coming out of bad situations and grieving very thoroughly,
Mm.
um, I started to come out of grief, and there was suddenly more of myself to care for. And I didn't know those parts of myself outside of grief, like at
Yeah.
all. And I'm like, what are these needs? Like, this has always worked and now it doesn't work.
Mm.
I have more needs than I know how to deal with. And so it felt like I lost something, but what really happened was I gained something that I had lost a long time ago and didn't
Mm.
remember being there.
Yeah.
So where I'm at right now is like, okay, pampering myself and eating food that makes me feel good isn't going to cut it. And what do I actually need? Who am I outside of grief? And like, how do I honor that person by
Mhm.
caring for that person? If that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. It's so, one, like I appreciate you sharing that. And two, so like sometimes I think more visually, and it sounds like a little different from other people's stories of like, I didn't realize self-care was important, or like I was just sort of pushing through until like something bad happened and then I realized I needed to do it. And like it sounds a little bit different of like, oh, I always knew it was important and I always actually tried pretty hard to nourish the part of my person that I knew about and like could see. But I don't know, it sounds like there was a bit of like an iceberg situation. Like most of who I am was actually covered up by something kind of heavy and sticky and hard to deal with. And as I moved out of that, it sounds like your self-care really evolved as you recognized and picked up and embraced new parts of yourself or parts of yourself that you were coming into contact with for the first
Yeah.
again. Um, I'm also like just really curious, what is it like to look back? Because I think a lot of people could probably connect to this. To look back on a time when you thought things were like good, or like you thought you were doing the thing, and then hindsight, you're like, oh, that like actually wasn't what I thought it was at the time.
Yeah. I think that's I think it makes me sad, like sorrowful sad that I didn't see how much there was to have.
Mm.
And then there's another part of me that recognizes that I wasn't able to see and is almost thankful that I didn't know myself and then lose myself, because it made it easier to just get through
Mm.
and process through when I didn't have, when I couldn't see all the missing pieces. And I think you kind of, to get through tough stuff, you kind of have to mute that part of yourself, because like you've got stuff to do, you've got bills to pay, you've got a human to be, and sometimes it overcomes you and you know can't life at all. And then other times you're like, all right, silence all of that and just go 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 and push through until I'm in a place where I can process through this well or safely or functionally.
Mm.
So it's sad, but it's also like I'm grateful to my psychology, I guess, for allowing me to live through that, if that
Mm.
makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's like said really eloquently. And it's like actually pretty sophisticated what you're saying. Like there's a lot of grief I hold, and it almost sounds like regret, or like there is a part of me that maybe I could have been taking care of better, but I didn't know about. And at the same time, it was actually really adaptive to like get me through the shit I needed to get through to not know about it. And I think a lot of folks find it hard to hold two of those things at once and recognize that like both of those things can be true. Um, I think it's natural for us to like be pulled one way or the other, and it's quite hard to juggle both of those. And like, is that something that just comes naturally for you? Like, did you just realize that and get to that place where you can hold both of those things?
Not exactly. I think when I was beginning to come out of grief, there was a whole layer of grieving what I lost to grief. Like I grieved a lot of years, a lot of things, and I lost a lot of myself. And now I realize that. And now I have to grieve that I lost all that. And now that I'm done grieving all that I lost, I can look at myself with grace to say, like, it was out of your hands. You know, like what human can process grief without being in grief? Like grief means that parts of yourself, you know, are coated in grief, are full of grief everywhere. And you can't get through grief without being covered in grief. And so now I have grace for that, or mercy, or whatever you want to look at it as. But I can look at it now like that. But at first I felt a lot of like anger about what I lost to grief. And I think that adds another layer to everything you were already grieving, to say, like, I was already suffering, and now I just realized I was suffering even more than I was suffering, and I'm angry about that. A lot of anger to process.
And I imagine that could easily go to a place of, and now I'm angry with myself for not realizing it. So now that adds like another layer of putting something on me when I'm already covered in grief and trying to get out of it. And I appreciate the place it sounds like you've arrived at now, of like giving myself some grace, recognizing that like there was no other way for me to get through that. Like, yes, maybe in an ideal world, it would have been nice if I didn't have to. And that's just not how it worked. So I can give myself a little bit of grace, cut myself a little slack, have a little compassion for myself in that. Because that feels really important and hard. I feel like we've talked about that in other videos too, that like we are sometimes our biggest critic. We are sometimes hardest on ourselves. And I think there are a lot of people who are experiencing similar sorts of things as we come up on a year of being in COVID. And I think this year has been a really strange year of like lots of grieving and loss.
Yeah.
Life of experiences, of opportunity, of connection, of community. And I imagine there's a lot of folks struggling to give themselves a little bit of grace.
Yeah.
Right now.
I think that's 1,000% true. And my answer to that would be, if you're struggling to give yourself grace, you probably aren't done grieving. You know, like you need to let yourself grieve all of that loss, because it was loss, you know. And then when you're through it, then you will likely be able to see yourself with grace, you know. When you finish processing it, you'll realize that like all of that stuff really was hard, and you didn't need to be a ray of sunshine during it, and you didn't need to be fully functional, and positive wasn't necessary.
Yeah, especially when you're still in it. Like you're saying, it's really hard to get out of grief when you're still in the grief. And so like, I don't know, we're still in this weird pandemic life. People are still losing and still grieving a lot of things that are still currently happening. And so I appreciate that piece of like, the only way through it is through it. And if you just keep going, you'll get to grace. If you're not at grace yet, that means just you got to keep going.
Yeah. And I think that's why, that's why I spent a lot of time in grief. Well, not only because there was a lot to process and things kept happening, but I think grief is kind of natural to me personally. And I'm not sure if it's because I've done so much of it, or if there's some part of me that recognizes that it's important or validates my own grief. But whatever it is, I feel like I needed to grieve as long as I grieved. I needed to grieve for a lot of years, you know, and I needed to grieve everything really, really thoroughly. And I'm still grieving some things, but the point is grief does come to an end eventually. And some things take longer to grieve, and you have to grieve in order to see yourself in a non-hurtful light. Like, you shouldn't see yourself as, the source of your grief. Grief is a result of something that happened. And maybe you made that thing happen, and that's questionable, but the point is maybe you did something out of grief, and then the loss that came from that is something you also have to grieve, and you just got to grieve everything really well. And then you will feel more graceful to yourself.
I also, this felt like a subtle point, but it feels really important to highlight the piece that you can move through grief and come out of the other side and still be sad. That doesn't mean you'll be happy. The other side of grief is not happiness or joy about the thing. You can move through that and still feel sad, still feel regret, still feel negative, other emotions, but it sounds like it's a different experience. I don't know. It reminds me of when, if you've ever lost a person, I know, when we lost my grandpa last year, and people would talk to me and be like, you probably will never not be sad. And it was like, what? What are you telling me? But it was the sadness feels different and it looks different. And you get used to it and you carry it with you differently. It doesn't feel as consuming. And so part of, I think, what I'm hearing you say that feels important is moving through grief doesn't mean that everything will feel wonderful all of the time.
Yeah.
And it's still a helpful part of the journey to get to experience some of the other stuff.
Right. And being in grief kind of puts a part of you on hold, but kind of all the while that part of you is drying up. And so when you come out of grief, you're probably going to feel really dry. And that's where self-care is, super, sorry, my cat. That's where self-care is super important, because that's when you come in and are like, okay, now I am able to actually access this part of me that needs nourishing. And in my case, you might not know what that looks like, and it might be really frustrating for a long time as you're raving mad, what is wrong with me? What do I need right now? I don't feel good.
Yeah.
But you're now able to nourish that part, which is the missing piece.
Yeah. How did you, I appreciate you sharing that, I think, very human reality of cool. Now I know I need nourishment and I still don't know what to do. What was that process like for you? How did you figure that out? Have you I don't think arrived is the right word because I imagine it's going to continue to change. But like, do you feel like you're at a place that for now you know how to nourish yourself?
No. I feel like I'm at a place where I'm starting to get the idea.
Mm.
But well, I think taking time to really try to understand yourself is really important. The way I personally enjoy doing that is personality stuff like Enneagrams and, like MBTI type stuff. It, it's obviously not encompassing everything, but seeing myself from the outside, or at least how I function when I'm healthy, helps me to recognize my needs. So like everybody's different and everything, but I also feel like if you are like me and you're like, I don't even know me at this point, like starting with a framework and then learning how you deviate is a lot easier than trial and error, which was the first long bit of that.
I so appreciate that because it's funny, like as a therapist, I think I so enjoy that work that you're talking about. Like just exploring and almost like being a tourist in your own hometown. Like we don't always do that, right? Like we go somewhere else and we're like, let me read up and visit the places and see the things I'm supposed to be. But like we don't always take the time to do that for ourselves. And I think it's important, like a lot of people, I don't know that many people think of psychology. You can totally bring your cat on screen if you want to, by the way. I know I'll speak for everyone here that pets are welcome.
I don't know if she will like me too. She's in heat right now and very agitated.
Oh.
Woo, nope, she didn't like that. Well, that was Noko.
I am not ready for this. I was not prepared.
Yeah, like I'm yelling at you. I'm not asking for you.
But I do appreciate because I think a lot of folks don't think of psychology as a tool just for exploration. I think a lot of times there's an assumption that like if I'm going to be interacting with psychology, whether it's in therapy, whether it's my own work, whether it's doing some sort of self-assessments like you're talking about, there has to be something like wrong or a problem or a diagnosis. And it's like, well, I mean, maybe, but also you can just learn. I like how you put it, like learn what I could look like.
Yeah.
At my foundation, at my core, without all of these other pieces. Just knowing like the ingredients almost, it reminds me of that I have to work with here. And then figuring out, well, what do I want to make? How do I want to put this together?
Yeah, exactly. What I really appreciate about stuff like Enneagrams, for example, is that there's great resources that share what each type is like when they're like not functioning well and like in their nirvana state, like this is you, like what you could be if you were like godlike version of yourself, and then here's you like at rock bottom. And what I like is I can what I've done is I've read through that and been like, wow, I remember that year, and ooh, there was a few months of that, and it helped me to understand my own rhythms and how I deal with stress, which isn't well, and how I process through things, and also it helped me see how I'm getting healthier. And that was exciting. And, it helps me to be more attuned to my own seasons, I would say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that to me is invaluable because, while you will know yourself better than anyone else, you may not understand yourself better than anyone, better than, so helping myself to understand my potentials for good and bad, I feel like has done a lot for me.
Yeah. And I like also imagine it's not easy work. Like I imagine it takes time and thought and energy to sit and reflect and do some of that exploration. And like, I don't know, you're a full-time mom and you have a full-time business. Like, how do you do that? How does that work?
Well, like I said earlier, balance is a strong word. um, I think I just do it when I can.
Mhm.
Like when I'm in a space that's ready to receive that.
Mm.
Like I follow like Instagram accounts that talk about that kind of stuff. So sometimes it just happens to be a moment and I run by a post and I'm like, ooh, and I just gathered some knowledge, but it was low intensity.
Mhm.
And I can just sit there and think about that post for a few days, you know. It's not, I'm not super aggressive about it. I've been more aggressive in the past. Like I think therapy is great. And you know, I've done therapy and that helped me a lot. And I would consider those like intensive, aggressive,
Mhm.
like moments of learning and sharing and, you know, dealing with issues. But right now I'm more passive and I take things in. Maybe I think about a question and I Google it and then I process it for a few days. And I think that's the way that really works for me, you know? Like I can't do it all, obviously, but but
Yeah.
I'm still doing a little bit of something here and there. And to keep my mind open to the fact that I'm still learning helps me to want to make
Mhm.
efforts to learn about myself.
Yeah. That I don't know, maybe it doesn't feel this way to you, but it actually sounds pretty active to me. Just maybe not at like the same speed you had been at other points in your life where you're saying like, yeah, therapy was a bit more aggressive or having more time to devote to this. And that feels like a really important thing for folks to hear too. I imagine, especially on Instagram and even sort of where you started with like your personal Instagram, that a lot of times, even when people are being vulnerable and showing the growth and the learning and the work that they're doing, I don't know, I think it's easy to look at other people's growth and learning and work and be like, oh, mine doesn't look like that. And so maybe I'm not doing enough, or maybe I need to do more. And like, I don't know. I think that's across the board, whether it's like your actual job that you're making an income on, whether it's your hobby and your side hustle, whether it's working on yourself, whether it's anti-racism work, whether it's your allyship, whether it's whatever. I think it's easy to get into it's supposed to look like this. And if I'm not doing it like this, I must not be doing it right. And
Yeah.
I don't know, that sounds like setting yourself up to do something that doesn't work for you. And if you know something that works and it's still moving you forward, even though it might not be at like max speed all the time, that sounds like you actually have pretty good self-awareness about like what you need in those moments and making it a realistic, sustainable part of your life.
Yeah, I feel like I try to I've always thought of myself as self-aware until I realized there was so much of myself I wasn't aware of.
Well, that's how it works, right? The more self you are, the more you realize you don't know. Like I think that's it.
Yeah, it's like that saying, when you think you know everything, you know nothing. And
Yeah.
when you realize you know nothing, you begin to know something. I think it was one of those. But I think knowing myself is important to me because I feel that the more I know myself, the better quality of life I will have. And especially having spent so much of my life in grief or in situations I couldn't control that were really, really bad,
Mm.
or, depression and stuff like that. I think having experienced so much of that, I can't stand the thought of hindering myself.
Mhm.
It it makes, and sometimes I have to reel that in and know that I will hinder myself until I'm healthier or until I'm more nourished, but like I can't stand the thought of being the cause of more suffering in my own life. Like the last thing I want, I just want to be fulfilled and happy and live the best life I can. And to me, a big part of that is knowing myself so that I can avoid certain things and do certain things to have that. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think it's a lot like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I so appreciate, I mean, just hearing you talk about it, I so appreciate. It's funny, I'm like, my cheeks are hurting from smiling because I'm like, hearing you say some of the phrases that I was like, I have said that phrase so many times, and like feeling very much on the same page, and like really appreciating the part that I'm hearing that's like the goal is to have a full whole life and experience, and like recognizing that that might mean like other parts that come along that are not ideal or are not wonderful, like yes, I will hinder myself, or yes, I might feel sad, or yes, I might hold this, and like that is not a sign that I'm not doing it right, because the goal is to have a fulfilling, like meaningful life.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just think folks get off track in trying really hard to have like a pain-free life. And like, I don't know, bearer of bad news here. I'm gonna lose a lot of followers. Everyone's gonna stop watching this, but like, I don't think that's possible because life is hard. Being a human is hard. Like, pain happens. Pain is natural. Pain is part of being alive. But it's the suffering that you're saying, which is like keeping yourself in pain that you don't need to be keeping yourself in. Like that
Yes.
need to happen. And that feels important because I think sometimes people see those as the same thing. Like pain and suffering is the same.
Yeah. I I think I think the best thing that people could do who are feeling that way would be to not, it's hard to not get angry when you see that there is a better quality of life out there and it doesn't feel attainable to you. But quality of life, I think, comes through getting through all of the muck. And some people just have less muck. Some people start with less muck and get all the muck later. And if you're like me and you had a few lifetimes worth of muck right at the beginning, like it's just going to be a long thing, because I would get angry all the time. Like, I just want to be happy and fulfilled, and I'm sick of grieving, but I'm still in grief. And I just want to feel at peace.
Mhm.
And I feel like the best thing you can do is validate that. Like, yeah, it sucks. It sucks to sit in grief. It sucks to suffer because of someone else or some outside factor. And it's okay for me to feel like that right now. But to also be like, but if I work through this and I grieve through this, something else might come along. True. But like, this suffering will be over
Yeah.
at some point, and I can protect myself from suffering in ways that I don't need to. I
Yeah.
can protect my mental and emotional health in the ways that I can and grieve through the things that I don't have control over. And like, I think that's the best thing to do is like totally validate that because it does suck, but also be kind to yourself and know that some things are out of your control and you have to grieve it anyway. Like a lot of things.
And so I mean, hearing some of the things you're saying, and I'm wondering if this relates to your homework or a challenge or call to action or encouragement or whatever you want to call it for folks to try on this week and see how it feels.
Well, I had a couple of ideas, but not a completed thing. I thought one idea is to like, if you need tangible homework, to sit down and like just write out a list of all the things that you are or have grieved. I'm grieving the fact that I didn't get to go on my summer holidays. That's real. Grief, as big or small as you can think of, just all the grief. Write it all out and then look at it and think about how your grief is impacting your ability to care for yourself and accept it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I lost a lot of myself to tragedy this year, and that is where I'm at, and accept it. Mm-hmm. That doesn't have to be where I am in a year. That may not be where I am always, but it's where I'm at now. I can't be more than I am. But also to look at the parts of yourself you are able to access and nourish, and try to really think about how you can care for yourself through grief. What parts of yourself can you care for through grief? And focus on caring for what you can and accepting the parts that are just going to have to be on hold till you stop grieving. Mm-hmm. And then another thing I thought of is that maybe if you're coming out of grief and you thinking that there's needs that you're not recognizing, to maybe take an Enneagram test.
And this feels very, one, I'm like, okay, people, it's week 18. The easy one-step homework is done and over. We're in the advanced class here. We're coming up on final exams. Like, we 3 or 4 part homework. Like, that's allowed. I love the flow of this so far. So I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I'm very excited. Keep going. So take a test.
Take an Enneagram test, and read through it. And maybe you'll have to like read the things around it to kind of figure out exactly where you are, but read it from a place of this, Enneagram talks about your basic things that you long for or seek in life, and also the things that cause you grief and pain and suffering and all that stuff, the things that are the worst to you. And understanding what you long for and what causes you internal anguish, I feel like is paramount for one, but also really easy place to start. Like, this is where I'm at, and you'll know you've hit it because it'll feel very real. You know you found it when you're not like, oh, I don't think so, but you're like, wow, like, I'm uncomfortable reading this. That's how you know you found the right one.
But I feel called out right now.
Yes, you will feel called out. And, no matter how unique you are, there's still parts of you that flow in a rhythm. And, some people are more placid and some of us are everywhere. But, the basic thing is you have a current, you have a flow, and you have something that you're drawn towards. And so look at it like that and let yourself sit in that. And I think that's enough homework for 1 week. Just read it.
I think we're gonna have to come back and do like a part 2 and part 3 of this, because I'm like, yes. And then what else? And then what should we do? But I do really like, I think this flow, like, I don't know, we're joking, like, haha, yeah, it's a lot of things, but also I think this is a really nice flow of helping give folks a little bit of like a roadmap of like, this is what this could look like, because I don't know, sometimes grief feels like so overwhelming or so consuming that it's like, I don't know where to start. And so then I get stuck in place. And then when you're stuck in place, there's no way to ever move through the grief. And so, like, I don't know, that feels like a nice 3 or 4 part, sit down. First of all, recognize, make space for the grief that you have, the grief that you have had and already moved through, but like, I don't know, come to a place of recognition, putting it all out on the table. And then, and this is maybe like my favorite, feels like the undercurrent of all of these things is like, accept that. That doesn't mean you have to like it. That doesn't mean you're excited about it, but just sit with it. You don't have to try and change it. You don't have to try and do something different. Just accept that that's what your truth looks like right now. That's what it is.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be like that forever. So you don't need to look at it from a hopeless or helpless point. Just this is life right now. And be okay. You're gonna have to be okay with it, because it's not gonna go away until it's gone. You can choose to fight it, but I think grief is one of those things that you can only slow down, but you can't speed it up. And slowing it down is like avoiding it and denying it. And grief just needs to be acknowledged and given space. Like, maybe you need to like talk about it over and over and over and over again for like 6 months. And whatever grief needs to look like for you. I think it looks different for everybody, but I think the one thing everybody can do is slow their grief down.
Yeah, 100%.
And it's gonna suck. Grief isn't fun. It's involuntary. You didn't ask for grief, but it's there.
Yep. But then I like too the piece that you're saying that feels like the next step of like, and as you move through grief, you still need to nourish the rest of your person. And so how can you do that? How can you do both of those things at the same time? Because I like the point that you're saying, like, if you're trying to ignore your grief or pretend it's not there, you're also denying nourishment to part of your experience right now. So how can you nourish all of it? And if you don't know, and you don't know what that looks like, or you don't have a clear picture of what parts of you exist right now outside of grief, well, then go take a test, go learn a little bit about yourself, and then you have a strong foundation to go back. And I don't know, it feels like that's a cycle. Like, cool, now that you have the information, go back to step 1 and move through it again, and then keep going through that until you know when you're like, okay, I think I've moved through this. I think I can look at this with grace. I can hold some compassion now.
Yeah. And I think I might put some links in my Instagram bio so that if somebody wants to do this challenge, which I hope somebody will, that what I find to be most helpful is there, but then you can do whatever you want to do anyway. But, I do think that there's some really good resources that are also free. And So I'd be happy to make that more accessible.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do that, because then we'll tell folks here, but when I post about it too, I'll tell folks to make sure to head over to your profile so they can find some of those resources. And like you're saying, there are a lot of options here for what folks can do, what folks want to share. I'm obviously, and it sounds like you two are curious to hear and know what people are willing and wanting to share with us. That might be sharing the things that you're grieving, and it might not. Like, that also doesn't, you don't need to make all of your losses public for the world. You
Yeah.
can be moving through and talking about your experience and what it was like to try and sit with the grief and the reality of your grief and not change it or not fight it or not rush through it, but just experience like, or talking about something you learned, a part of yourself that you had not been nourishing as much as you wanted to. Like, there are so many things to share here. And I'm excited for people to move through that. And if you want to share, I'm happy to be the person that you can share with.
Yeah. I'm comfortable with grief. I'm comfortable with other people's grief. So if you want to talk to me about it, I'm obviously not a therapist, but I am somebody who's not going to be afraid of your grief. So you're more than welcome, and I'm more than happy to hear about it. Or like, well, I just uncovered this thing today and I didn't know it was there. Help, #parched. You could just, share what is there.
I love that. And I think this is much needed, especially, I don't know. I say this every time, but I'm like, what a nice gift from the universe that this conversation happened this week as we come up on a year of COVID, as we come up on, I don't know, like what feels like forever of being in this strange, like, twilight zone of a world. And just I think a lot of folks feel like my grief is strange or different, or like what I'm feeling, no one else is feeling it. And grief is one of those things that it's just lighter if you're not carrying it by yourself. Like, grief is very heavy. And if you have more hands that are willing to say, like, oh, I can reach out and help you for a minute, I think folks might be surprised to see how much lighter that grief can feel when it's being held by other people.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see our hands, but also I imagine lots of other hands reaching out in response to this sort of.
Yeah. This is such a supportive community. And like, remember, there's all types. Like, it may look, all gentle and stuff because we're talking about knitting, but there's all types of people in our community, and they've gone through all types of things. And so I want to believe that anyone who talks openly will have the utmost support and love, and probably find out a lot of other people have been through the same thing, and it's you're not alone. And I think that's the best thing to feel through grief, because nobody can take your grief away, but you don't have to be alone either.
Yeah.
That's a lot worse.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't know. I'm just excited. This talk was like wonderful, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's after 7. That like flew by.
Oh yeah.
And just holding a lot of appreciation, and I feel nourished after this conversation. And so, one, to say thank you, because this was wonderful, and I'm super excited, and I'm like joking about you coming back, but also not joking, because hopefully I think this will probably continue in years to come. And also for folks to realize that like nourishment can come from lots of different places. And sometimes it's just having a meaningful, intimate conversation with someone.
Mhm.
It doesn't take that long to do. So I am
Yeah.
appreciative, Autumn, of your openness and wholeness, I think, in coming to this conversation, and your willingness to step in, especially at the end. And I know for a fact I'm waiting because I'm sure the DMs are going to start pouring in that are like, oh my God, that talk. But I know for a fact that this talk is going to be really, really important for a lot of people. I cannot say thank you enough.
That means so much to me. I was super nervous, like super nervous.
Yeah.
But I also knew like I couldn't properly talk about self-care for me if I didn't talk about grief. Oh, here it comes. I'm crying. Right at the end, huh? I thought I was gonna cry, but then I made it through the whole video. I knew I couldn't talk about it honestly, and skip that part because it has been both the greatest hindrance to my full caring of myself, but also in a twisted way, allowing myself to grieve has been my self-care for a lot of years. And so I'm thankful to anyone who watched or is going to watch, and for you for having me and hearing me. And it's been special and meaningful for me to talk about it. So thank you.
That's always glad to hear that part. Erin said this is seriously amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Aren't following Autumn yet? Like, what are you doing? Go over, give her a follow. I'm going to talk about your t-shirt again because I'm so upset. You need to go look at the like detail shots, and like you can kind of see right now like the raglan seam detail, but it goes down the side and the back and like the split. It's just so good. And obviously, you haven't figured it out in the last hour. Autumn's an amazing human, and so definitely go give her a follow. Definitely go support her. And hopefully, Autumn, this is not the last time that we chat on here.
I hope so too. This was really nice for me.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, everybody, thank you. Have a good night. Go take care of yourselves. Take